The house stood 18 feet wide on a stone foundation, and the morning light came through two glass windows ordered from a catalog in Cheyenne. That is where this story ends. Here is where it begins. October in Coulter's Ford arrives without ceremony. The aspens along the creek road turn and drop within the same week, and the light shifts to something lower and more honest, the kind of light that shows what things are made of. On the morning in question, frost had come in overnight and left a thin white film on the grass, and the house caught the early sun in both its windows at once, the glass throwing two small rectangles of light onto the ground out front, like something placed there deliberately. The stone foundation ran the full perimeter. Someone had fitted the courses tight, no gaps a winter wind could find. The chimney rose from the east wall, 12 feet of rough-cut stone, and it was older than everything around it by 23 weeks. The one thing left standing after the fire, the one fixed point from which everything else had been measured out and built. A man and a woman stood in the doorway. They were not touching. Then one of them reached for the other's hand, and they were. The chimney had been there since April. Not the house, the chimney. Just the chimney, rising out of a black rectangle of ash where a house had been, standing the way a chimney will when everything around it is gone, upright and purposeless and almost accusatory. The barn was ash, the porch was ash. Whatever had been inside, a chair, a table, a bed, was ash. The fire had come on a Wednesday, late in the month, from a lantern that had tipped in the barn and found its way through the dry boards and into everything else. By morning, there was nothing to rebuild from except that chimney and 4 acres of Wyoming and whatever a man could carry to them in the weeks that followed. 7 days after the fire, a train arrived. She was on it. She had come from Cincinnati with 1 trunk and a canvas bag in answer to an advertisement printed in a church newsletter the previous winter. The advertisement had described a homestead, a house, a man who needed a wife with practical skills and a willingness to work. 2 of those 3 things were still true. He had stood on the platform and told her before she stepped off the last rail step. Not at the bottom, where the ground was level. Before, while she was still on the iron step with one hand on the rail, her trunk already passed down to the platform behind her. He had looked up at her and said it plainly. "There's no house, there's a chimney, and 4 acres. I'll buy your return ticket if you want it." She had looked at him for a moment. Then she had stepped down. The platform at Coulter's Ford ran about 40 feet along the west side of the tracks and ended where the gravel did. 7 in the morning. The light was still low and coming in flat from the east, catching the dust that moved along the street behind the station house and the smoke from the kitchen stovepipe at the boarding house 2 doors down. He had been there since 6. He was standing at the near end of the platform when the train came in, his hat in his hand, his boots carrying the pale gray of ash that no amount of scraping fully removed anymore. He had tried. The gray had worked its way into the leather. She saw him before he saw her. Or she saw the boots before she saw him, the boots and the hat held down at his side, the way a man holds something he is not sure what to do with. She was still in the car, one hand on the seat back, watching the platform slow to a stop outside the window. The trunk was already with the porter. The canvas bag was over her shoulder. When the car door opened, she moved to it, and the porter stepped down first, and then she was at the top of the iron steps, one hand on the rail, the other settling the bag strap. He was looking up at her then. His face gave her nothing soft to stand on. Not unkind. Simply exact. He was a man who had been through a thing recently, and had not yet formed any expression about it that was comfortable to wear. She would learn that later. In the moment she read it as composure, and decided to match it. He said what he said. "There's no house. There's a chimney and 4 acres. I'll buy your return ticket if you want it." She heard all of it. The chimney, the 4 acres, the out he was handing her with both hands before she had even stepped off the train. She heard also what he had not said. that he had come anyway, that he had stood there since 6, with ash still in his boots and his hat in his hand, and that the offer of the return ticket was costing him something he was not going to name. She looked at him. The train was still breathing around her, steam from the engine moving forward along the platform in slow rolls. She looked at him for the length of one full breath. Then she stepped down. She stepped past him to where the trunk had been set on the platform boards, and she bent and took the handle herself. It was a heavy trunk. She straightened with it and shifted the canvas bag on her shoulder and stood there, both hands occupied, facing the street. He put his hat back on. He said nothing yet. She had not asked him to say anything. She was looking at Coulter's Ford, the single street, the dust, the low wooden fronts of the buildings, and taking stock. He did not take the trunk from her. He understood already, in whatever way a person understands a thing before they have had time to think it through, that she had picked it up herself for a reason. He walked beside her instead, slightly ahead, to angle through the crowd on the platform, and she followed without being asked. They passed the depot window, and the woman behind the glass watched them go, with her hands still and her face carefully arranged. The wagon was a single bench, one horse. He loaded the trunk into the bed. She climbed up herself. He came around to his side, and they drove out of Coulter's Ford without speaking, past the dry goods, past the livery, past the last building with its weather-peeled sign. And then the town was behind them, and there was only the road and the grass coming up pale green on either side, and the sky, which was very large and pale blue, and gave no opinion on anything. The property sat 1.5 miles east. She knew it before he said anything because the chimney was visible from the road, 12 feet of dressed stone rising from nothing, rising from a field of black, and standing as though it had been put there on purpose, and everything else was still forthcoming. He stopped the wagon and set the brake. She looked at it for a moment without getting down. The ash field was wide. Rain had pressed some of the charred timber flat, but the rest lay where it had fallen, joints still recognizable, a door hinge half buried, the iron hook from what had been a kitchen wall. The chimney stood at the north end of the ruin, plumb and intact, its mortar clean between every course. Someone had built it to last, and it had lasted. She climbed down from the wagon and walked into the ash. He watched from the wagon step. She went to the chimney and stood at its base, then began to walk the perimeter of what the house had been, reading the footprint in the ground, the outline of the foundation, the corners where the sill plates had burned away, the direction the structure had faced. She walked it the way a woman reads a page she has already half memorized, once around, methodical. Her boots left clean prints in the gray. Then she went to the trunk. She lifted the latch herself and found what she wanted near the top, wrapped in a work shirt. She drew it out and the shirt fell aside. A mallet, short-handled, the head a dark, close-grained wood gone smooth on the face from use. She walked to the foundation stone at the chimney's base and set it down on the stone and straightened. She looked at him. He was still standing at the wagon, hat on, nothing moving in his face but his eyes. She said, "Start with the footing or the frame." He said, "Footing first." She put the mallet back in the trunk. They drove to Coulter's Ford in the late afternoon, with the chimney behind them still holding its 12 feet against the sky. She did not look back at it. He did, once, then faced the road. The boarding house was run by a widow who kept 2 rooms for let and did not ask questions that were not her business, which in Coulter's Ford was a rare quality. The room was $8 a month. He paid the first week at the front desk, and she stood beside him and did not object to the arrangement and did not thank him for it. The widow handed her the key and studied the pair of them for a moment before turning back to her accounts. He left for Greenvale on a Monday morning, the 2nd of May. 19 miles of road running northeast, mostly flat, The mill sitting at the bend of a creek that moved fast enough to turn a wheel 10 months out of the year. He had worked there once, briefly, at 19, before moving on. He knew the foreman's name, and the foreman's habit of pricing high for strangers and lower for men, who already knew how lumber moves. She stayed. She bought a ledger at the general store, small, cloth-covered, 12 cents, and a pencil, and an extra pencil, because one was never enough. She went back to the room and sat at the table by the window, where the light came in from the east, and spent 3 days with the ledger open and a sketch forming in it that was not a sketch, exactly, but a set of proportions held in graphite. 18 feet wide, that was the number she started with, drawn from the chimney's base, which was solid and would not move. The foundation stones could be extended. The chimney would become the eastern wall's anchor. She drew the rooms in order of function, not sentiment. The kitchen nearest the heat source. The sleeping room facing north, to stay cool through summer. A second room that could be either a workroom or a storage space, depending on what the next year required. She calculated board feet the way her father had taught her, by surface, by span, by load. Headers over the windows. The ridge beam, she did not guess. She divided, and she wrote the numbers in a column, and added them twice, and got the same answer both times. When he returned to Coulter's Ford on Wednesday with a price list from the mill's foreman, he found her at the boarding house table with the ledger open. She turned it toward him without comment. He read it standing up. The numbers ran down the page in a clean hand. Board feet by category, the footing first, the frame after. He looked up. She was watching him in the same way she had watched the chimney, without hurry, waiting for the information to settle. He said, "These are right." She said, "I know." They broke ground on the footings the second week of May. The frost had gone out of the soil just enough. He tested it with a bar iron each morning, driving it into the earth at the 4 corners of the planned foundation, reading the resistance the way another man might read a ledger. When the bar sank without protest to 18 inches, he said they could start. She was already pulling on her gloves. The chalk line came first. She held one end against the chimney's base. He walked the other to the corner stake, and the line snapped blue across the ground between them. A clean, indifferent mark that turned intention into geometry. She knelt and checked the corner angle with a framing square borrowed from the general store's back room. Adjusted the stake by 1/2 inch. Checked it again. He did not ask why she was checking twice. He had begun to understand this was how she worked. They poured rubble stone footings over 3 days, the same pale limestone as the chimney, and when the sill plates went down on the 5th day of framing, she brought out the mallet. He had seen it in passing, the short-handled thing, dark-headed, worn smooth at the grip from a long prior use. He had taken it for a spare. Now he watched her drive the first tree nail through the corner post and the sill plate with 4 strokes, not 5, and he understood the mallet was not a spare. The tree nail was white oak, tapered, hammered flush, and then just past flush, so the wood would swell with weather and hold tighter than it was driven. He knew the technique. He had seen it once, briefly, working under an old German carpenter in Nebraska. It was not common. It was not learned from a book. He did not ask where she had gotten it. She did not say. By the 2nd week, the sill plates were all set, and they were raising studs. The work found its rhythm. She would notch, he would hold, she would drive. The mallet rang against oak, and the sound of it carried across the 4 acres, and out across the flat ground beyond, and she did not seem to notice it was carrying. She was counting the strokes. She was watching the grain. On the 11th day, he took the mallet to drive a king stud she was holding plumb, and she let him take it without comment. He felt the balance of it in his palm, the weight forward, the grip worn to the shape of a smaller hand, and he swung it once, and it was right, and he handed it back, and they moved to the next stud. He did not say anything about the mallet. She did not either. The frame went up, piece by piece, the chalk blue lines becoming wood, the wood becoming walls, the walls beginning to hold the shape of something that could be entered. By the third week of May, the frame was standing, and the town had formed its opinion. She heard it at the dry goods counter on a Saturday morning when she came in for nails. Not directed at her, directed at the woman behind the counter, who had the broad, settled look of someone who had lived in Coulter's Ford long enough to believe she understood its arithmetic. The woman was speaking to a neighbor in the unhurried way of someone saying a thing for the fourth or fifth time, polishing it smooth with repetition. "Irregular," she said. "The whole arrangement. A woman from Cincinnati with a sewing bag, and no one to answer to. A man with 4 acres of ash and a chimney. She gave it until June. She set her coins on the counter. She took her nails. She did not look up when the woman's voice slowed and stopped. He was waiting with the wagon at the rail post. She put the nails in the back without comment. He did not ask what had taken her. They drove back out along the flat road, and the morning was clear and hard lit, and the chimney was visible from half a mile out, standing against the sky, the way it had been standing since April. The floor joists were all in by Thursday. She was proud of the spacing, 16 inches, consistent, checked twice with a steel rule she had borrowed from the liveryman's toolbox, and returned the same afternoon without his needing to ask. She moved on her knees across the frame, and it did not flex under her. That was the thing about a floor frame done right. It did not announce itself. It simply held. On the following Tuesday, she heard boots in the grass behind her. She was working a joist with the draw knife, pulling it toward her in long, clean strokes, the shavings curling off white and falling onto the subfloor below. The angle needed another pass. She took it. The boots stopped at the edge of the property line, where the grass gave way to the cleared ground. She did not look up. She had learned, in 3 weeks of this work, to distinguish between the sounds that required attention and the sounds that did not. These boots did not move. They stood. She finished the pass. She turned the joist, sighted down its length, turned it back. She started the next stroke. When she finally looked up, she saw a woman in her 50s, in a dark coat, the one from the dry goods counter, standing at the property's edge, with her arms at her sides. Not watching the work exactly, looking at it the way you look at something that has surprised you, and you have not yet decided what to do with the surprise. She looked back down. She pulled the draw knife through the grain. When she looked up again, the woman was gone. The joist was true. The storm came in from the northwest, the way Wyoming storms do, without negotiation, without the long gray warning that Ohio weather gave. 1 hour there was light, the next hour there was not. She had been fitting the second course of window framing when the sky went the color of pewter and the temperature dropped 6 degrees in a single minute. She felt it on her forearms first. She set down the frame and looked west. He was already looking. They got the lumber under canvas before the first drop fell. The shell of the house held 3 walls and a partial roof, enough to keep the worst of it off if you stayed to the center. He had a lantern. He set it on the subfloor between them, near the chimney's base, where the stone still held the day's warmth. She pulled her ledger from the canvas bag and opened it. He sat with his back against the south wall and looked out through the open wall frame at the rain coming down in sheets across the acreage. The thunder came in long, rolling intervals, not the sharp cracking kind, the kind that means the storm is settling in. She ran a column of figures, board feet remaining, days to first frost if October came early, cost of the second window pane if the catalog price had not changed since June. He did not speak. He rarely did during weather, she had noticed. He went somewhere inside himself that was not closed off, just quiet, the way a room is quiet after the work stops. The lantern light moved with the drafts coming through the open wall. She had rewrapped the mallet handle 2 days prior, in the evening, after her palms had started to blister at the same spot on both hands. The original leather had worn slick and then bare over 40 years of her father's use, and then 3 months of hers. She had cut a strip from a scrap of harness leather and wound it tight and tucked the end under itself, the way he had shown her once, doing the same thing to a hammer handle of his own. She had not thought about it until now. She became aware that he was looking at the mallet where it rested on top of the canvas bag. Not staring, just noting. The way he noted things, quietly and with full attention. She looked up. He moved his eyes back to the rain. She looked back down at the ledger. The rain hit the partial roof and found every gap and came through in thin threads that darkened the subfloor in irregular patches. The storm had no intention of hurrying. Neither of them moved to suggest it should. The lantern burned. The chimney stone was warm at her back. She added the column a second time and got the same number as the first. Outside, the 4 acres ran with water, and the ground received it. July came in hard. The heat arrived the first week and did not leave. The grass on the 4 acres went from green to pale gold in less than a fortnight, and the ground that had run with water in May cracked at the edges of the foundation trench like old porcelain. She wore her sleeves rolled to the elbow. He worked without his shirt some mornings, and then put it back on without ceremony, when she came across the site with the ledger, or the measuring cord. The walls went up in the first 2 weeks of the month. She had not understood, until they stood, how different the property would look with vertical lines in it. The chimney had been the only thing breaking the flat of the burned ground for 3 months. Now there were studs, plates, corners, the skeleton of rooms becoming visible against the sky. She stood at the edge of the foundation one evening and looked at it and did not say anything. He had noted the same thing earlier and also not said anything. They were getting faster. That was the change July brought, besides the heat. The rhythm of the work had settled into something that required less discussion. She knew where he would need a measurement held before he asked. He knew which boards she had already culled from the pile, without having to sort through them himself. Neither of them had named this. It simply operated. The roof joists came in the 3rd week. He cut the first rafter and set it, and she rechecked the angle against the ledger entry she had made 2 weeks prior, when they had calculated the pitch together. She did this with every measurement before he cut. She had done it from the beginning, and he had stopped commenting on it sometime in June. The way a man stops commenting on rain when he understands it is not going to stop. This time the angle was off. 2 degrees. Enough that the ridge beam would not seat correctly. Enough that the whole pitch would read wrong against the exterior walls. Not catastrophic. Not if caught here. She checked it twice. She wrote the corrected number on a torn corner of ledger paper and set it on the sawhorse beside his hand. Then she moved to the other end of the site and began pulling the next board from the pile. He looked at the slip of paper. He looked at the rafter he had just cut. He set down the saw. There was a long pause in which the heat pressed down on the site, and the grass beyond the tree line held perfectly still. Then he adjusted the angle, recut the tail, and lifted the rafter to set it again. It seated clean against the ridge beam without a gap. He folded the slip of paper once and put it in his chest pocket. She did not look up from the board she was measuring. The ridge beam ran the full 18 feet, and the weight of the structure began to declare itself, slow and real, above the stone. The framing went up in July. The foundation work began in August. He had explained it to her in early spring, when the chimney was still the only thing standing. The stone base would need to be incorporated into the new walls, not rebuilt around. Incorporated. The chimney had survived because it was sound. 12 feet of dry-stacked limestone with a throat cut by someone who knew the work. To waste that was to waste the best thing left on the property. She had nodded and written down what he said. By August, she understood what it meant in practice. The stones had to be sourced, hauled, fitted, and mortared in a Wyoming August, in direct sun, with no shade structure over the foundation trench. He cut the forms. She learned to mix the mortar, 1 part lime, 2 parts sand, water added slow, until the consistency held its shape when she drew a line through it with her finger. She learned this by doing it wrong twice, and right on the 3rd morning. The work was rhythmic, and it was brutal. He set the stones, she mixed, carried, and handed them up. A stone that looked manageable at the pile weighed differently after the 14th carry across broken ground. She did not comment on this. She adjusted her grip and kept her back straight and moved. On the 4th day, her gloves wore through at the right palm. She did not notice until she set a mortar bucket down and the handle left a mark in blood. She looked at her hand for a moment, then she picked the bucket back up. He noticed before she finished the carry. He did not say anything. He set the stone he was holding, checked its level, and tapped it once with the back of his trowel. Then he walked to his work satchel at the edge of the foundation trench, found a small tin, flat-lidded, the kind that held salve or boot dressing, and brought it back. He set it beside her water cup on the flat stone they used as a work ledge. He returned to the foundation without looking at her. She finished the carry. She set the bucket. She stood for a moment looking at the tin. Then she opened it, worked the salve into the torn skin of both palms, and closed the lid. She set it back beside the water cup where he could take it if he needed it. She pulled her spare gloves from her apron pocket, thinner, cotton, not ideal, and went back to the mortar. The foundation rose another 4 courses before the sun dropped low enough to quit for the day. The chimney base stood flush with the new work, its limestone indistinguishable from the stones laid that morning. The freight wagon came into Coulter's Ford on a Tuesday in September, 6 weeks before the first frost was due. 2 crates, straw-packed, banded with thin iron strip, addressed in catalog lettering from Cheyenne. The driver had to ask twice at the dry goods counter which road led to the property on the north edge of town, because no one had expected them to still be building. The rancher's wife was at the counter when he asked. She watched the wagon turn north from the window. She did not say anything immediately. She finished her transaction, folded her receipt, and set it in her pocket. Then she untied her horse from the post outside and followed the wagon at a distance that was not quite incidental. By the time she reached the property, the crates were already off the wagon. He had worked the banding loose with a pry bar, careful not to split the wood, and was pulling straw from around the first pane with both hands, slow, feeling for the edge before he lifted. She stood at the fence line watching. The woman was checking the second crate, running her fingers along the frame joints, checking for fracture. Glass windows, 2 of them, ordered from a catalog, freighted 300 miles. The rancher's wife tied her horse and came through the gate without being invited. She had not done that before. The woman looked up and did not seem surprised. The rancher's wife looked at the house, framed now, sheathed, the stone foundation solid from 3 feet below grade, and then at the windows, and then at the ledger the woman had set on the work ledge beside her mallet. "Can I see the floor plan?" It was not exactly a question. The woman picked up the ledger and brought it over. They stood together over the open pages for close to 20 minutes. He went on unpacking straw. The glass caught the afternoon light and held it, sharp-edged, throwing a long rectangle across the ground. The rancher's wife asked about the corner joinery, the tree nail technique, pegged without iron, the way the sill plates were seated. The woman told her father had been a joiner in Cincinnati. He had worked that way from habit, and she had watched him long enough to carry the habit herself. Who taught him? His father before him. The rancher's wife looked at the ledger a moment longer. She did not say she had been wrong about any of it. She did not say what she had told the women at the dry goods counter in May, when the whole town was watching and doubtful. She handed the ledger back. She looked at the glass windows standing against the crate in the September light. "Those'll hold the cold out," she said. "That's the idea," the woman said. The front door was the last thing. He had built the frame in the third week of October, working from a plumb line and a folded square of paper he checked 3 times before he trusted it. The hinges were iron, ordered from the same Cheyenne catalog as the windows. He had mortised the plates himself, cutting each recess to depth with a chisel he stropped ice before he used it. The door was pine, clear-grained, planed flat over 2 evenings on a pair of sawhorses behind the house. She had done that work. He had watched her run the plane and said nothing because there was nothing to say. The board was true. She knew how to read the curl of the shaving. The fitting took 2 mornings. The frame was close, but not quite. A frame never is, the first time you hang a door in it. She shimmed the bottom hinge a 1/4 inch and trimmed a sliver from the latch side, and on the second morning it fit clean. She set it against the exterior wall and went in for coffee, and did not say it was ready, but he knew. The morning they hung it was a Thursday. The air had the quality October gives to air in that country, still, thin-edged, carrying the smell of frost that had not yet arrived but would. He was not sure when the town had gathered. He became aware of it at some point while they were lifting the door into the frame. A distance of people at the edge of the property, standing in the way that people stand when they are trying not to appear to be watching. The rancher's wife was among them, 1 or 2 men from the livery end of Main Street, the woman who ran the dry goods counter, her arms folded against the cold. None of them came close. He set the pin in the top hinge. She held the door level, her father's mallet hooked in her belt, though she had not needed it for this. He set the bottom pin. They stepped back. He pushed the door gently with the flat of his hand. It swung open. It swung to the left, in one clean arc, no binding, no scrape of wood on the stone threshold, and held at its full width in the autumn light. He stood looking at it. She stood looking at it. From the distance, someone, he could not tell who, made a sound that was not quite a word, not applause, just the small involuntary noise a person makes when something works exactly the way it was supposed to work. He set down the hinge pins. She set down the level. The hinge pins were still in his palm, small, cold, heavier than they looked. He closed his fingers around them and set them on the stone threshold, not in his pocket, not on the ground, on the threshold, as though they belonged to the house now. She set the level down beside them. The bubble had gone still. The silence was not the silence from the platform in April. That silence had been held together by effort, 2 strangers deciding, without speaking, what they were each willing to risk. This one was different. This one did not need to be held. It had its own structure, its own load-bearing weight, the way a finished wall does when you pull away the scaffolding and find that it stands without you. 18 feet wide, stone foundation, 2 glass windows, their panes catching the October light at separate angles. The chimney at the center, 12 feet of fieldstone that had stood through the fire and the summer and the 23 weeks of work, rising now through the new roof, incorporated, permanent, the oldest thing in the house and also the thing the house was built around. She was looking at the chimney. He was looking at her hand. It was a carpenter's hand by now in all but name, the calluses at the base of each finger, the old scar from the framing nail in early June that had healed clean. The mallet was still hooked in her belt, her father's mallet, the short-handled one from Cincinnati that she had never once explained and he had never once asked about. He reached down and picked up her hand. Not the way a man holds a woman's hand at a dance. The way you pick up a tool you have worked beside for a long season and intend to keep. Deliberate, without performance, with the full weight of meaning placed quietly in the gesture and left there. She let him. From the edge of the property, he heard the sound of boots on frozen ground, the small dispersal of people moving on with their morning. The rancher's wife. The men from the livery end. He did not look toward them, neither did she. He pulled her hand forward gently, and they stepped through the door together, through the frame he had planed and hung himself, across the threshold where the hinge pins still lay on the stone. The morning light came in through the east window and fell across the floor in a long, specific rectangle. The chimney stood at the center of it all, holding the new roof up. Neither of them said anything about it. There was nothing left to say that the house had not already said.